Today we learned about the zero product property. And the way it works is you have a series of parentheses, like thing 1 times thing 2 equals 0. Now, as long as one of these things is equal to 0, the equation will make sense. So we're going to use the example here. We have two sets of parentheses. It's set equal to 0. We're ready to use the property. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, what would it take to make this parentheses equal 0? And many of you can see that answer without even having to do any work. You can see that x would need to be -7. But sometimes we're a little less sure of what the answer would be. So if you have something like 2x minus 3, what you're going to do is you're going to set that equal to 0. You're going to say 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. And you're just going to solve. Let's add 3 to both sides. And we get 2x equals 3. Well, if we have 2 times x, we want to divide by 2 to undo it. And we get that x is equal to 3/2. It is perfectly acceptable to get a fraction. And so x can equal 3/2 or 1.5 and -7. All it means is that your graph crosses the x-axis at those two spots. So sometimes they're going to ask you to factor. And that's what we didn't really cover or practice enough in class. So before we start anything, we're going to say, what does it mean to factor the greatest common factor? So if you have something like 6x minus 18, a lot of you will remember from last year and from last semester, what do both of these terms have in common? The greatest common factor would be a 6. So if I divide out a 6, if I pull out a 6 or factor a 6, what would be left? Well, I'd be left with x, and I would be left with -3. And if we redistribute, we get 6x minus 18. They're both equivalent. So what we want to do, anytime we have x squared and x in our problem, we're going to want to set the entire thing equal to 0 and then factor the greatest common factor. So let's say you have 5x squared minus 35x is equal to 0. Step 1, we're going to set it equal to 0. Oh, check, it's already done. Step 2, we are now going to factor using the greatest common factor. So if you look, they both have a 5 kind of in common. 5 goes into 5 and -35. The other thing they have in common is they both have an x. So what we're going to do is we are going to divide out a 5 and an x. Now some of you guys can kind of do this in your head. If you have trouble with this, what you're going to do is just on the side, we're going to write a little 5x squared minus 35x. And we are going to divide both by 5x so we can see what's left. If I check it out, my 5's will cancel, and x will cancel, and I will be left with just x. Likewise, the 5 can go into the 35 7 times, the x's cancel, and I'm just left with a -7. This is fully factored. So what we do now is we go back and we use our zero product property. Anywhere there's an x, it's like there's a little parenthesis, so I'm going to enclose the 5x, and we are going to say, what does it take to make 5x equal 0? Ask yourself, 5 times what is 0? So x can equal 0, and in this case, what does it take to make this equal 0? You can see it's a +7. So we have fully factored and solved this equation, x equals 0 and x equals 7. And that is how you do these problems. We'll do one more factoring just to feel good about that if you need to. Otherwise, get started on your homework. All right, here's our last problem. Let's say you have 9x cubed minus 3x squared equals 0. We need to find, do they have a number in common? And the answer is yes. They both have a secret 3 in there. So I am going to pull out a 3. If I divide 9 by 3, I get a 3. There's still going to be some x's. If I divide this minus 3 by 3, I'm going to get a minus 1. And there's still going to be some x's. So let's see what else we can take out of this problem. What's the biggest amount, the greatest amount of x's that you have in both of these problems? One of them is an x cubed and one of them is an x squared. The most they have in common is x squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out an x squared as well. If I divide this by x squared, there would only be one x left. But if I divide this by x squared, they're gone. That equals 1. So there is nothing to put here. Your fully factored thing is 3x squared times 3x minus 1 equals 0. And again, we would just set each little piece equal to 0 to solve. Good luck.